There we go. Brilliant. Okie doke. Let's make a start then as people start to flood in on 6:30. Yeah, there we go. Just ticked over to 6:30. So, yeah, everybody, thank you and welcome to the Welsh Azure User Group meetup of the 20th of March, 2024. As usual, thanks for joining. Just a quick slide showing the folks behind the scenes. I'm on my own tonight. Mr. Fatunka is traveling back from London, I believe, at the moment. So bear with. So I'm doing all the controls here off a laptop. So I know it's not that difficult, but it is for somebody of my caliber, I think, at the moment. So as I say, there's a few more folks behind the scenes. There's our LinkedIn addresses. I always like to kind of flash those up on the board because as I say, every month it's the community user group. We're always open to suggestions, ideas, if you want to talk. If you want to be part of the user group, if there's anything you've got that you'd like to put forward, please add us all on LinkedIn or find us on the old Twitter, X, whatever we call it these days, and say hello. Every opinion is always welcomed, in order to make things better for the group. Okay, so onward to tonight's sessions then. Another awesome couple of speakers, and just catching up with the guys now before everybody started to come in. But yeah, it's nice to see some community folks that you've known for a long time. And obviously Rolf has spoken at the user group in a while. I can't believe it's been a year and a half, Rolf. That's crazy how time flies by. So look, really happy to have Rolf back at the group now, looking at AKS and Azure Draft. So yeah, really interested to see that talk. I must admit, not come across Draft before, so really intrigued as to what Rolf is going to show us, as I'm sure everybody else is. So we'll be kicking off with Rolf very soon, and then we've got Mr. Ryan Yates joining us. So, like I say, I feel like I've known Ryan for so many years now, and we've never actually met in person. It's ridiculous. So, look, Ryan, huge thanks for you as well to join and give up your time to talk us around operational management of Azure and making it a bit of a breeze. So, I'm sure there's going to be lots of good nuggets in there for everybody to kind of take away. So we're timing wise, we're looking, once I stop rambling on and doing the housekeeping and the usual bits and pieces, in 10-15 minutes, Rolf will be picking things up, and I'm looking at around about 7:30 for Ryan to start his talk. Yeah, bit of exciting news tonight. We've got a new sponsor that I'll talk about fairly well in a second. We've got a few extra prizes that I'll dig into in a moment, but before then, usual housekeeping rules. Should go without saying, to be honest, but please, everybody, be courteous to each other. It's a community youth group. You've all got control of your own microphones and cameras and so on and so forth. There are no silly questions. Please, if you've got any questions, stay on mute unless you're invited to come off mute, but use the chat facility in the team session. Ask any questions. Usually people start kind of flooding in. I think everybody just gets used to ignoring my little intro, to be honest, and people start coming in after that. So there we go. He says that, and people start joining. So yeah, drop your questions in the chat. Feel free to ask any questions. Normally, folks in there will help ourselves out if the speaker's engrossed in the session, or we can ask them when the speaker is ready for the questions. I'll leave a little QR code at the end of each session as well. So any feedback, if people have got 2 minutes to fill in a little bit of feedback, that would be hugely welcomed. Like I say, we use that feedback to kind of try and steer the sessions for the following month's talks and things like that. So that'd be awesome. And as mentioned, we've got the quiz. So everybody feel free on a mobile device or through a web browser. That'll be after Ryan's talk. So roughly speaking, around about 10 past, 8, or maybe a little bit later tonight, Ryan. So I know your talk is a little bit longer. So yeah, around 20 past, 6:30, something like that, 8 UK time, which is in about 2 hours time from now. But yeah, please do join in that quiz. There's some good prizes up for grabs. Most importantly, be interactive in the chat and enjoy the sessions. We're all here to have a little bit of fun and learn something as we go. Don't feel afraid to use the chat and make some new friends as well while you're at it. Prize wise, there we go. We've got a couple of Amazon vouchers up for grabs, and Packet is our new sponsor that I'll touch upon in a second. I've given us some ebooks as well. So we've got containers for developers. And by the way, I've just picked arbitrary. I'm not saying one is better than the other. We've got containers for developers, and then we've got the Azure IoT handbook to give away as well. So I just put them in arbitrary for 1 to 4 places, and the way things are going at the moment, that's really good odds of winning if you're still all around by the time we get to the quiz. But like I say, we normally get a few more people joining fairly soon. So there's our quiz prizes. Quick moment for the sponsors, as I always do as well, because without these folks, these groups, we wouldn't have prizes to give away. If we do in person, we wouldn't have the cool pizza and beers to kind of be on standby for us. So, it goes without saying that we're hugely thankful to the sponsors that we get at these user groups. Servant are a prominent Microsoft partner in the UK, based up in Glasgow, Scotland. As you can see, they support a number of the local user groups as well, from the Northern to the Glasgow to ourselves at the Welsh Azure user group. Big shout out to Des and the team. They've been kind of supporting us from day one, really, which is coming up to, oh, I want to say, yeah, what was it? It was COVID we started, so yeah, coming up to 3 years now, which is phenomenal. So huge thanks to Servant. Equally, CreditSafe are a local company, actually based in a global business, but they've got a HQ based in South Wales. So it was really cool to get those guys on board as a sponsor to the user group. Fingers crossed we'll have some representatives from CreditSafe on to talk to us, I believe probably in the May event, so a couple of months' time. They're doing some really good stuff from a multi-cloud perspective. So one of their key architects there, hopefully will be joining us in a couple of months to give us their own story of how they're working with that kind of multi-cloud strategy and what they actually do and how they use it. So that's set to be quite an interesting talk. So really looking forward to those guys joining us. But yeah, thanks to CreditSafe, and like I say, thank you to Packet. As of this month, they've joined us to supply some links, basically, to some ebooks that we can use as spot prizes. So for anybody that doesn't know who Packet are, there's some information. I didn't realize, actually, they started life up in Birmingham in the UK, so that's not a million miles away. So they got thousands, there we go, over 9,000 books and ebooks, audio books and video courses. So they are a global technical learning content provider. If you want to go and look them up, go and look them up. Like I say, I was shocked to see that they were based from Birmingham, because I've known that brand for a significant number of years now, and I didn't realize they were quite so close to home. So huge thanks to Packet for joining the Welsh Azure crowd. So I think that's probably about it for me in terms of intros and housekeeping. I'm going to keep an eye on the doors there and let people in as they join. But for now, I think I'll hand you over to Rolf. And if you're ready, Rolf, I'll let you take it away with the first talk.
I will get my screen up. Thank you. I'm not making a mistake again that I did a few years ago, where my apparels left me in some chaos.
It was the demo gods weren't with you.
It was actually so. The entire screen, and where are you now? It's this one. Share. Please let me know if you have visuals.
Nothing coming through yet, Rolf. I'll stop sharing quickly. Let's just make sure my PowerPoint doesn't get in your way at all.
Give me 1 sec. It's already happening again. It's all over again, but give me 2 seconds.
That's all right. No, take your time. Anybody got any good jokes to tell? How's everybody's day been at work? That's probably usually the best fun that we have. There you go, Rolf, you're back in the room there now.
So it's funny because when we're talking about Azure Draft, it's not yet available for Windows, so you have to run it on WSL or on a MacBook. So I picked up my MacBook, and the funny thing is, I haven't installed Microsoft Teams on my MacBook, so that's why it's actually. I still had to do the security settings for to share my screen. So, but if everything went well, you now see my screen, right?
We've got you loud and clear as well. So, and I can see Martin's joined as well. Martin just got your message. Glad you found the link there. That's as long as you're in. But yeah, Rolf, over to you. You take it away. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So you see my title slide, right?
Got you. Yeah, can see you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me again, John, and thank you for introducing me. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about Azure Draft and the Azure Kubernetes Services Accelerator, actually. So I'm not going fully deeply into AKS. This is more kind of an introductional session, but indeed about a dynamic duo when it comes to containerization and deployment. And one of the fun things of doing community user group sessions is that you get to talk by yourself. This is me. My name is Rolf Schutten. Also, thanks to actually my session here 1.5 years ago, I am now a Microsoft Azure MVP. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm from the Netherlands, and I was just talking with Ryan and with John that currently I'm working as a division director at Conclusion. So I really hold on to these community sessions and community events to keep my technical level somewhat on a level that is acceptable for myself. Because nowadays I am responsible for a variety of engineering teams, but I'm not part of the engineering teams anymore. So these kind of sessions are actually the most deep dive I get to do on a technical level. So I'm really thankful for that people still invite me to these kind of sessions. I'm pretty easy to find on social media, and if you feel feel free to connect with me on any of the social medias. Some of you might know Robin Smorenburg, which I host a podcast with around Azure, which is called Azure Talks. And actually, the session of today started with the recording of one of the podcast episodes with Steve Buchanan. Some may know him. He's a senior program manager at Microsoft for everything around the cloud native and Kubernetes platforms. And everything that I'm covering today can also be found on my personal blog websites, schutten.cloud, including templates and the step-by-step guide to create the demo environment I'm showing today as well. But let's not talk anymore about myself. Let's talk about the session for today. So today, I will not be doing a detailed, highly technical workshop around Azure Kubernetes services or containerization or all other topics around it. Today's session is to present an accessible way to get started with AKS and containerization to the people that are new to it or want to have a more efficient way of containerizing your applications. There's also an easier way to streamline your deployments rather than just containerizing your applications, also to deploy it towards your Kubernetes cluster. So first, I want to introduce you to the AKS construction helper for the people that don't know it already. And obviously, I will demonstrate that in action, and then I will do the same for Azure Draft. So let us first talk a little bit about the AKS construction helper. And all kinds of detailed configurations can be made within the cluster and beyond. And if you have designed or deployed AKS clusters before, you pretty quickly get rattled up within the amount of options, and it can be quite daunting and time consuming to reduce your efforts in the portal experience or to use infrastructure as code if you are not very familiarized with that or are very deeply bonded into the best practices of that. So Microsoft actually built a web app for that, which is called the AKS Construction Helper, which provides a more guided experience to create your AKS environment. And beneath it, it provides templates and deployment scripts to quickly create a fully configured Kubernetes environment on Azure. And in the web app, which I will show you in a minute, it allows you to tailor it to meet your operational and security and best practices needs, ready to run your workloads in a test environment or in production. A side note, I will not show you any best practices today. I will really show you a demo environment just to let you see the real power of it. But in any case, what I'm showing you today, do not use it for production environments, because I don't think your security officer will be very glad that you implemented the way that I will be demonstrating today. I'm really showing you it helps you to dynamically generate the parameters to call the infrastructure as code and provide deployment options using various ways. Actually, you can use the Azure CLI, you can use GitHub Actions or Terraform even. And without further ado, let's just take a look at the AKS construction helper and how to deploy a Kubernetes cluster. And I actually prepared the session today, so the demo king won't actually find me today. So if I ran into some problems, I already deployed several clusters this morning. And what we're looking at right now on my screen is the AKS construction helper, which is actually accessible through the link azure.github.io/AKS-construction. And what you see here is that you have several options between the most simple barebone cluster towards that you have more control on source solutions and even highly managed environments. And these are the principles where you will actually get to detail out your cluster. The same goes for the security principles, where you have no additional access limitations in terms of network security groups or ACLs or whatsoever, towards more on the right side end, that you have full Entra, Azure Active Directory, which it was called, integration, working with private clusters, have your east-west traffic controlled, etc. You can also choose other options where you go more into the AKS secure baseline, or that you actually use the Azure Landing Zone Accelerator, which is most of you might know the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. And if you go towards the more the ready methodology, Microsoft has given you all kind of accelerators for different type of platforms. So let's say the integration platform using integration service of Microsoft. There's also an accelerator specifically for AKS, and it helps you to actually detail out the accelerator deployments. But for today, I want to look at the principle driven, because that is what I'm using for my demo environment. And because it's a demo environment and I want to quickly deploy something today, I will go for the simplest, for the simplest options. And then again, you get to choose between non-production or production workloads, which actually you choose a production for a higher availability level, using availability zones, have it stretch out in multiple nodes. And I don't need that today for the application and the demonstration that I will be showing you today. And once you fill out all these parameters on your naming conventions, and maybe you even want to put in your own IP plan or whatsoever, you have all these kind of options that you can choose from. I believe the current general available option is 127. Not sure if 128 already is GA. And you can just down drill everything that you want to detail out, right? So if you say, I want a non-production workload, but I do want the uptime guarantee, you can still pick it out. And there you detail out everything around what you want with your cluster, and if you need a container registry, and obviously we will need it today because we want to deploy something to our cluster through a container registry. And just for the sake of this demo, I will go for a basic tier, but people try this out when I'm done with my session and you had an awesome learning experience from Ryan. The code works. I assure you the code works. And when you have filled it all out, you can simply choose on the bottom if you want to use your Azure CLI scripts, if you want to deploy it through PowerShell, if you want to use GitHub Actions, if you want to use Terraform code even, and it might you might find that it is actually deploying from a template in a GitHub repository on the AKS construction and in the AKS construction Git repository. I have tried to copy this entire template and put it in my own Git repo. And these updates are so frequently that I stopped doing so because there was no actual reason for me to put it in my own Git repo. I would say just use these template calls, and if you use Terraform, then actually there is no reason at all to put it in your own Git repo, other than maybe some security and compliancy purposes. So what I've done this morning already, I deployed it already, but for the sake of demoing it to you, I copied the same code and just to show you that it actually works, and we'll let it run when I go further into my presentation. But you will see that it is actually just deploying as we expect. And I'm using the Azure CLI for this demo purpose because, like I said, I normally work on a Windows notebook, but I had to switch out to my MacBook because Draft is actually not available for Windows yet. So while this is running, and if people have deployed Kubernetes clusters before, they know that it runs for several minutes. So let's just look back when we had a little deep dive into Draft. Azure Draft. So people that are not familiar with Azure Draft may be very happy to know that Azure Draft is a tool that streamlines your application development and deployment into any Kubernetes cluster. So it's not solely for AKS. You can also use it for Rancher clusters. You can also use it for Amazon Kubernetes services. But as an Azure MVP, and since this is the Welsh Azure user group, we will focus on AKS. And it uses two simple commands that developers can leverage to hack into a container-based application without requiring Docker or even installing Kubernetes themselves. So Azure Drafts takes a non-containerized application and it generates the needed artifacts like the Docker file and deployment manifest to containerize it and make it ready to deploy it into your Kubernetes cluster. Here we go. So Draft is an open source project. It was actually acquired by Microsoft. It's not developed in-house by Microsoft. It's now under one of the program managers that is actually responsible for more than just the Draft tooling. And you can actually generate more than one artifact. So you can generate a Docker file, obviously, and you can choose between manifest files, which for the people that don't know the differences between manifest, Helm, and customized configurations is manifest files are actually raw YAML files that describe the desired state to deploy to your clusters. Helm charts are more of it's more of a package manager that uses templated deployments. They are YAML files that are templated, and we call them Helm charts, these templates. And you have customized configurations, which is more if you want to have environment specific changes because it uses an overlay type of deployments based on a base configuration. And all three can be used using Azure Draft. With just a few commands, as shown in this slide, you can also generate a GitHub Actions deployment workflow. You can create the OpenID Connect connection to your GitHub account. You can make your application accessible through the internet. You can print out info of supported languages. By default, Azure Draft supports Node.js, Ruby. I believe it also supports PHP and Python, Java. And as Azure Draft is written in Golang itself, it also supports Golang applications. However, I believe that Draft can be customized to support other applications as well. I haven't tried it out myself, but I believe it can also support .NET applications. And if it's not today, then probably knowing Microsoft a little bit over the years, that is something that certainly will come in the future. So to use Draft, you need to have a recent version of Go installed on your workstation. And that installation obviously can be done by manually or using Homebrew or whatsoever. And again, a step-by-step guide can be found on my blog website, or you can just go to the Draft website. And in addition, you can also use Azure Draft within the Azure CLI. It's now part of the Azure AKS CLI on the AKS preview extension. And there's actually an extension for Visual Studio Code. It's called the AKS Dev Experience extension. And I figured that I go very fast through my content here. So it's lucky that Ryan needs a little bit more time, but because I think I will be done fairly quickly today. Let's check out if our Kubernetes cluster is already deployed, and then we'll go over to the application itself. And unfortunately, it's still running. However, I promised you that I came prepared. So I was actually deploying number 3, but I already deployed number 1 and number 2. And I really need to check if I have deployed the application this morning. I think I deployed it to 1. I'm pretty sure of that. So what we're going to deploy today. Oh, look here, it's ready right now. So we have number 3 over here. So what I deployed is actually the AKS cluster, and I checked some boxes for doing alerting, and I also wanted my container logs version 2. So it deployed the log analytics workspace and the container insight solution. And it deployed the container registry itself, if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. And I'm actually going to copy that because I will need it in a few minutes. So I'll copy the name of it. Also, it deployed the managed resource group, where typically your virtual machine skill set is, where your public IP address is, where your load balancer is, and the managed identity, all those bells and buttons that we need to actually have a working Azure Kubernetes cluster. But I promised that we would take a look to Azure Draft. So today we're going to deploy a Pokemon or Pokédex application. So for reference, I have a 7-year-old son who is very fond of Pokemon. And when I was writing this blog post, for the people that know Pokemon, Ash Ketchum, which is the primary character in that series, was ending in the series. So Ash Ketchum is no more, and as a tribute to Ash Ketchum and my own youth, and to my son being fond on Pokemon, I wrote this blog around a Pokemon application. And we are going to containerize it, and we're going to deploy it. So going to my folder, you see here that I have a Pokédex application, which is a Node.js application. It's actually a React.js application. And for the people that are familiar with React.js applications, they probably see things that they are familiar with. So we have the JavaScript files, and we have the package.json. We have some public files, which is the favorite icon, and the index.html. We're not going through all the code of that application. To be fair, most of the things I downloaded from community repositories in order to work. But we're going to deploy that application. But first we need to containerize it. So let's do so. So we're going to run the draft create command, and it instantly will ask me to enter the port that is exposed into the application. And by default, when running React.js applications, it's port 3000. So I will give in 3000. But if you have another application that is natively running on HTTP or HTTPS, it would be 443 or 8080 or whatsoever. And when I actually built this application, I believe the long-term serviced node version at the time was 16. Just to be safe, I will put in 16, but I know that nowadays it's 20 or maybe even higher. And here we are that you can actually choose between your different deployment types. And well, for the sake for this demo, we're going for raw YAML files. But as I mentioned, you can also choose Helm charts or you can use customization configuration. The port that's exposed within the application, it's also 3000 for me. And let's call the application just by its name, Pokédex. And then we need to fill in a port number to make the application accessible from outside the cluster, so towards the internet, let's say. And I will just go with 3000 because I don't really have any requirements to adjust that. And I will just go within the default namespace. Now, if you are running this in production, if you are using these type of tooling for production applications, you will probably not want to put it in the default namespace. You want to isolate it in its own namespace. But for the sake of this demo, again, I will just go with the default settings. You can also adjust the name and the tag. So the image version, let's say the image tag of your deployment, and I will just go with latest. And instantly now, you'll see that in this folder, we now have a Docker file and we have the deployment manifests. And just to analyze how this works, open with other. Visual Studio Code. You'll see the typical, and this is a very, very small and an easy example, right? But you'll see that it has built the Docker file. It's using node version 16 from a public repository or the public registry. It's exposing the ports that we actually filled in, and it copies the JSON file. It runs the npm install package to actually install the application as a Node.js application. And it will, when it's done, it will start the application. Going into the manifest files, and I think the deployment is of most interest of the people, this is typically the raw YAML file that we use to deploy towards the cluster. So here again, you have your container port, you have the image reference with the tag latest. So all these things that we would expect when we're actually deploying Docker images towards our clusters. But we're not really there yet, because as I mentioned earlier, we can also use Draft to set up our OIDC connection and create the GitHub repository. Now, there's one step that we need to do manually, and that's actually create your repository. So I'm going towards my own GitHub page, and I will create a new repository. Let's call it Pokédex Draft. And we're going to create it. There it is. I made a typo. I need to remember that because otherwise I will make mistakes. And we're going to run the setup GitHub part. An app registration name. Let's just call this Pokédex as well, right? So we'll call it Pokédex. It could be that I used Pokédex this morning as well, so it could run into an error. I hope not. So I want to use this subscription. Yes. Actually, we had created the 003 resource groups. So let's just fill that one in, draft. I deployed it to West Europe, 003. So here we have the GitHub organization and repo. The organization is Rolf Schutten, and the repo was AKS Draft. Double check that I filled it in correctly. Yeah. So now it's setting up the OpenID Connect connection. So I can actually also create, yeah, here it is. App already exists. Let's rerun it, Pokédex 2. Should work now. Should take a matter of seconds, not minutes. And there it is. So what it has actually done now is it created the app registration, so I can connect to my GitHub repository. So if we look over here, you will see the Pokédex that I actually created this morning, and this one we just created a few seconds ago. So this is actually the service principal, if you would say, that connects to the GitHub repository that we just created. So now the next step is that we actually create the GitHub Actions workflow to set the deployment process, because we have nothing with an application that is not being deployed. So we'll use the generate workflow command for that. And we had the manifest type of file, and here is the container registry. And if I'm correct, it's still under my pass button, and it's not. Retry. Manifest. Let's copy out the container registry name, because it will use this one to deploy, to upload the image and then deploy it to our cluster. There we go. The container image name, which is Pokédex. The name of the resource group where our AKS cluster is, which was 003. The AKS cluster name. I don't leave it by chance. I will just copy the name of it. AKS Draft Test West Europe 00. I already made a mistake. If you people see that I'm looking into the 001 resource group. So we're going to do it one more time. Sorry, guys. Because I'm deploying towards the wrong container registry. Here we are. Pokédex. Resource group. The cluster name. It's this one. The GitHub branch, which is by default is main. You could also use master. It's whatever you feel like in your branching strategy, but by default it's main. And enter the path of the Docker build context, but it's already within our root folder, so we'll just go by default. And now the funny thing is that we can just, I'm already in the folder. So if we look into the folder that I'm actually in, you see the Docker file manifest and our application. So we're just going to run our default Git commands to upload it towards our freshly created repo. And I will show you in a minute that it's actually running the GitHub Actions as well. So here we go. Here's the typo.
Well, I don't know if you can slightly zoom in on your window. I know a couple of people have just said in the chat about if you can make your text a little bit bigger. It's not the end of the world if you. I didn't want to put you off your flow then.
No, let me check if I can real quick. I actually played around with it this morning, but
I think you can use the whole control and plus thing to zoom in and out, I think, sometimes, and it's different on a Mac or whatever. Oh, that's better. There we go. Perfect. Thanks, Rolf.
Yeah, so I actually grabbed the wrong repo. Let's just add another repo, or for the sake of it, I will show you, because the deployment process takes about 3 minutes. And then I think that we had discussed that I have, I think, 4 more minutes for my session, John.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of time. Yeah, there's no rush. So
looking at actually deploying it, what I did this morning is you can see here. I will show you here. So we'll skip the waiting for the deployment process itself. But I want to show you that it actually created the action workflow in this repository. So if we go to actions, you will see it's here actually. You will see that it's actually created the workflow. So this is what the one I did this morning, 12 hours ago. And you see that it actually created the workflows for deploying the Azure Kubernetes service. So your typical YAML file for the build and the deployment of a container. So first it will build, and then it will deploy it to the cluster. And you can also see that when I ran it this morning, it is a two-phase pipeline where it first built the image and then it deployed it to my AKS cluster. Let's just have a look at how that looks like. And then I have to go back here and we'll look at the cluster of this morning. Run selected. Check if it's running. It is running. Let me get the public IP address of it. Here it is. Copy. And as I mentioned, we had port 3000. And here is our Pokédex application, which is actually the one that we just containerized and we deployed using Azure Draft. So to circle back a little bit about the prerequisites that you need, as shown in this short demo, there are some prerequisites that you need to install. If you want to use Terraform, obviously you also need to install Terraform. You do need Golang, as I mentioned before. If you want to use a Node.js application, you will also, it will probably be wise. It's not a necessity, but it would be wise if you install Node.js as well. You do need the GitHub CLI installed because Draft is actually calling the GitHub CLI. It is not built in the Draft installation itself. So yeah, that are just two simple commands to containerize and deploy your non-containerized application towards an AKS cluster. There are some small takeaways that are always good to remember when working in production environments. And the first one is that you should never blindly rely on any automation or tools that do the work for you. Well, I showed it in a demonstration way, but there's a necessity of manual adjustments or enrichment for your automation, and it is a pretty known pronouns that a fool with a tool is still a fool, and that also goes with Azure Draft. There are other ways as well. So be vigilant about what you deploy, especially in production environments. Security and resilience of a solution is only as strong as the weakest link, and I can tell you what I just deployed is pretty weak. So don't do this in your production environment. Once again, I can't stress that enough. The AKS Construction Helper can help you choose your operational security principles as well. There are very good options that are actually feasible and good to use in production environments. Ultimately, you must have a clear picture of what you are deploying, and you need to follow those requirements. Expect something to go wrong at some point, just like what I just did in this demo. I added a wrong remote Git repository. I hope you guys believe me that it would work as I did this morning, but the deployment process takes about 4 or 5 minutes. I didn't want it to go circle back again. Start with observability in your environment from day one. It especially goes for AKS clusters or containerized environments, because you don't want to be in the blind on that one. Yeah, I would say, John, that that's where I want to wrap it up.
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Rolf. I think we've got a couple of questions. Well, actually, Dinesh asks, back to that security point, I think, that you mentioned earlier. Did you deploy any Key Vault for store any secrets in that, or do you know if the construction helper allows you to deploy like a Key Vault in one of those templates?
So the construction helper gives you more than one option to deploy Azure Key Vault. It doesn't look at third-party Key Vaults or whatsoever, but it also comes with a Key Vault by default. No, it doesn't come with a Key Vault by default in the construction helper, but you have the ability to choose one. Yeah.
Got you. Yeah, for some secrets. So you didn't. Yeah. So I suppose in answer to Dinesh, you didn't use that Key Vault then. I guess you just kept. Yeah. Okay. No, it's brilliant. I mean, it's always nice to see some of those kind of features and functionality. That's the first time I'd seen Draft in action, really, and it's interesting to hear that it is more than just for AKS. You can use it across the board. Then that's
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's even. Well, I'm a very big fan of Azure Arc and Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters. It also works with Arc-enabled clusters.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and the VMware capable. Well, yeah, because what's the Kubernetes equivalent for the VMware offer? I think there's an AKS, an Arc agent for that. Just trying to think of the name of the VMware Kubernetes product. I can't think of it now. But no, that's really interesting. So yeah, so you can literally define and deploy your YAML or your Helm using Draft then directly to. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take a little bit of a deeper look at that. I think that's yeah, it's got me thinking now. But it's just interesting when you deal with customers that are doing lots of product deployments and application development, that actually what the benefits are with using some of those kind of native toolings that are on offer there. So no, great demo, to be honest, Rolf. I like the. Can you play the game? Can you play the Pokédex? Does it work properly? You know, is it?
Yeah, actually, I'm already working on a version 2 because it only has the forced 151 Pokemon. But yeah, it works, and it's not very detailed. It was just to fool around. Just to mention about Azure Draft, I don't know if there are any consultants within this meeting right now, but our engineers and consultants actually use it for the first stage of feasibility study of if applications are container ready, let's say, because it's a very easy way to quickly test if you can get it into a container very quickly. And obviously it's a quick and dirty option if you just use Draft, its default settings, but it is helpful to have some sorts of very fast feasibility study of is our application containerizable or not.
No, it's a really cool concept. Like you say, it's just that taking those first steps, using it to just get that overview. What is ready? What's got some work to be done, or what can't be fitted. So yeah, like I said, I think I'm gonna have to do a little bit of digging on that myself now. So yeah, thanks for the extra work. it's more things to look at. But no, Rolf, again, as always, thank you. Great to see you again, first and foremost. Thanks for giving up your time and giving a fantastic presentation as always. So yeah, if everybody wants to use the little the react button or come off mute and give Rolf the round of applause, that'd be superb. There you go.
Thank you. Very
silent
welcome.
round of applause, isn't it? But yeah, like I say, Rolf, feel free to stick around if you've got time for the quiz and that after Ryan's talk. But be part of that. But if you need to drop, not a problem either. But thanks again.
I'm going to listen to Ryan for a bit, so
Yeah.
I'm very eager to learn from him as well.
Absolutely. Well, there we go. Well, without further ado, let's hand straight over to Mr. Yates. Thank you, Ryan, for being here. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, and I've managed to finally get all the bits done for this presentation as I wanted to. So just let me get that across. Begin.
There we are. Got you loud and clear.
Yeah, is that actually showing it from slides, or is it still showing PowerPoint view?
It's showing your PowerPoint view, not your slide view.
Has that changed it now?
That's better. That's it.
Right.
Cool.
So this session is one that I've actually done a few times before as part of my time as being a consultant previously and in the Azure space, and also in just generally Windows Server administration space. So I'm a former 7-time awardee of the MVP award in Cloud and Data Center Management. Over the years, I've organised PowerShell user groups in the UK, which some of you may know me from, as well as some of the PowerShell conferences. I've presented at many different groups and whatnot over the years. You can find more about that on my blog, blog.killersuite.org. I've got a About Me page there, a Find Me At, where I've presented, where I've attended, sort of pages, and a bit more about me in tech. I predominantly use Twitter as my social media of choice, but you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I think that's the correct URL for my LinkedIn, but I'm very easy to find. And I also blog and have presented about mental health on my mental health blog, which is mhasl.me, which stands for Mental Health Affects Someone Like Me. And this is something I think is a very important thing to talk about just generally, as well as how making operational management of Azure a breeze can be very beneficial for your mental health and your ops and dev teams' mental health as well. So no further forward, our agenda for today is we're going to learn a lot about the foundational knowledge to get your organization and individually to a level where you really need to be with managing a platform as diverse as Azure is. And as I said, this is an old presentation that I've kind of tried to update a little bit, but most of the key things are still applicable and haven't really changed, other than maybe some new features here and there that may not be in this presentation. But there is still a lot that you need to know to get going. It helps you be successful. Most importantly, it helps you be secure. And then helps you be cost effective and not end up with a big massive bill at the end of the month that you go, oh yeah, if it's for your personal use of Azure, that's something that you want to make as minimal as possible. If it's for your professional use of Azure, your company will want you to make that as minimal as possible without having massive bills for no reason. And this now helps enable you to plan your whole journey about managing and maintaining optimized, governed experience with the Azure cloud, whether that is the public Azure cloud, whether that's a hybrid cloud using Azure Arc or Azure HCI, if I remember correctly, or whether it's a fully private version, which you could do with your own deployment of the Azure with the Azure Stack HCI, as it is now, I think, known. So general management is one of the big areas, and I like this page. This was a nice designer page. Let's go back one page. Designer image, but that shows you just the amount about, realistically for me, the amount of things of general management of Azure that's important. So the first one is the Azure portal. Now this, for me, I see this as a single pane of glass to see what your what's happening in your Azure environment. This is where you can go and use to see for any types of use with Azure. I'm a CLI person, as I say, running PowerShell user groups. I prefer to try and manage things from the command line where possible, but Also, having lived in the world where having graphical user interfaces like the Azure portal, it's incredibly useful for having this to be able to see what is going on in your environment. And it's great for all types of use, including help desk use, including being able to give it to your senior management team without giving them right permissions to break your environment, which I would very much recommend you don't give to your senior management team unless they know what they're doing. You can use the portal to deploy new resources. This is really useful in development flows, but I find it's better to not use the portal to do this and actually find programmatic ways to do this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. I recommend this as a read-only tool more than an actionable tool that you can use for making deployments and using right, particularly when you've got production workloads, unless you have a team where you're using privileged identity management and being able to give the roles where you give those out to individuals and you trust those individuals to do so. You can use the web portal versus portal.azure.com, or there was a desktop app years ago, which I think they've discontinued. I think this was only a brief period between Internet Explorer things and Edge getting more mainstream. I do think there should be a desktop app because honestly, I hate web pages and how slow they can be, but I think a good desktop app would be something that would be a good thing for the portal in future. You've also got the Azure mobile app, which for me, as somebody that has been on call for a product that lives and breathes in Azure, being able to restart a VM from the work on-call phone without having to boot up my laptop actually managed to allow me to go back to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning on a number of occasions, which is much easier and much more time management purposes, much better for you than having to waste time waiting to boot up a laptop and whatnot to get things running. There is limited functionality, but you do have and I'll point this out, you've got the Cloud Shell that's built in as well, which is a very incredibly important piece of tooling. So let's talk about management tools, because there's quite a few of them. Now, the key thing to understand is ARM, and we're not talking about your arm, you know, your right arm, your left arm, if you're lucky enough to have arms, but we're actually talking about what is the Azure Resource Manager. Now, if you've worked with Azure as long as I have, and I'm going to put my hand up and say I'm lucky that I came in when ARM came around and not when Azure Service Manager, the previous iteration of being able to deploy resources to an Azure tenant was around. We've had all of the fun of the pain of ARM, ASM as it was, being put into ARM. This is what the Azure Resource Manager does. It provides a layer to talk to all your applications, your virtual machines. It could be your containers, your web apps. It allows you to manage different services and different resource types and the different data stores. But everything that you work with, whether it be the Azure portal, the mobile app, the Azure PowerShell modules, the Azure CLI, your REST API clients, the different SDKs you've got. So you've got the .NET SDK, the Python SDK. .NET SDK is the one that powers Azure PowerShell. The Python SDK is the one that powers Azure CLI. You've then got Go SDK. You've got I believe you've probably also got Java SDK, and you've probably got a Rust SDK coming soon, if there isn't one already. But there's also then third-party clients like Terraform and so on and so forth that interact with either the SDKs or the REST APIs or the other tooling to actually interact with the Azure Resource Manager. So this is what does the brunt of the work. This is the thing you need to know about. This is one of the foundational tools of the platform that you do need to be aware of. It's the management layer for all your Azure resources, and it's the primary way to interact with your Azure resources, because everything else is just a layer of abstraction on this layer. And yeah, that is what is Azure Resource Manager. And it is a RESTful service, which is the most important thing to understand of it. Is it's a REST API based service. Now, the layers, and this is taken from Satya Val's session at Build 2019, and it's not very much changed over the years, so this slide is pretty much a copy and paste from that deck. But you've got all your different clients, whether they be your own personal ones that use the REST APIs, the SDKs, CLI tools, PowerShell, CloudShell. Then you've got the Microsoft clients, which are the Portal, CLI, PowerShell, CloudShell. I've just noticed I should have a capital S there in this one. Sorry to me for missing that one out. And Alan, I know you will probably give me a telling off for that one. You've got ARM client and resources.azure.com and various other third-party clients as well. Then you've got the SDKs, as I say, .NET, Java, Node, PHP, Python, Go. They all implement your connections, retry, and best practices, which is a lot of code that you don't want to have to manage and maintain yourself, which is why the SDKs exist. Then you've got the control plane, which is the ARM, but then this interacts with via various different ways. Might be REST API, it may be via SOAP implementation, it may be via other mechanisms to the resource providers, and then the services in their data plane APIs. These are things that under the hood you don't really get to really know and work with, but they exist, so you need to know that they exist. So Azure PowerShell and the Azure CLI, they're two of the most common tools for interacting with Azure resources. They're constantly updated. They have been since Azure PowerShell, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, was the old Azure RM, is now AZ, and the Azure CLI has gone over many different iterations over the years. There are other tools as well. Both of these are available in Azure Cloud Shell, which, as I said, you can use on your mobile phone, you can use it in Visual Studio Code, you can use it in Windows Terminal. They're both used for deploying resources, although not generally recommended for you using them from your machine for production environments. Instead, I would recommend to use an orchestrated release pipeline, where you manage and maintain your code in a code repository. You then have second pair of eyes that allows a deployment to pass or to not pass and actually go ahead, including stage gates, which can be automated stage gates. Does test pass? Does it be manual stage gates? In this case, I'm going to pick on John. John might be the second approver for a deployment going out to a production environment, and he needs to approve it before it goes. And whether that means that it has to wait until he comes back away from holiday before it can do, that's something that a part of governance into deployments would be something that your team should be looking into. You may not have a named person like John. You might have a group of people so that John's part of that group, so that if John's away on holiday, someone else in that group can do so. And that's better than just saying, hey, John, you're the only person that can give the second thumbs up to this going through. But that's the important thing about having orchestrated release pipelines as opposed to a dev free-for-all, which is great for starting things but isn't great for production management. And that's the important bit about this one. I don't like saying that devs can't have the access to do that, but they need to have a second set of eyes that isn't just them in their team to ensure that you're doing things right. And sometimes that second set of eyes should be somebody outside of their team too, so that you have a good set of communications across teams as opposed to having silo teams, which is something I see a lot of organizations do badly. And Azure PowerShell is not idempotent. The Azure CLI has been, I don't know if it's changed in certain bits where it might not be, but this is an important thing if you want idempotent resources. Azure PowerShell, and this shows how old of it this one is, that I'm using an AZPS 1.7 version for the overview, but the basic links are the same. Supports use across all OS platforms using PowerShell is now called PowerShell, not PowerShell Core. PowerShell Core was version 6 of PowerShell, but PowerShell is now just called PowerShell from version 7 onwards. Its main module is AZ, and it's a meta module that consists of a whole subset of additional sub-modules. Releases tend to be on a monthly schedule for AZ as a whole, but all of the other sub-modules can be released as frequently as they want. Previous Windows version, which was Windows only, was called Azure RM. The Azure RM used the .NET Full framework, which is obviously only Windows available, whereas AZ uses .NET Standard applicable, which is available on Windows, Mac, Linux, Unix systems as well. So an example of AZ PowerShell, and this is old, but I don't think has really changed. You connect to your Azure PowerShell, your Azure account, create a new resource group. You then create a credential to create that's used for your virtual machine. You then create the parameters using splatting to create a new virtual machine, and then we create the virtual machine on line 13 using the parameters that are provided above. We then output the virtual machine using that variable that we've contained it to. We then use the same thing again to use second virtual machine parameters, and then we can later on just remove all of those resources as using a PowerShell job, and then we can wait for that job to finish before we built, deployed and removed all the resources in 28 lines of code. You could do it in even less if you wanted to without using splatting and put everything on the same line, but splatting is a better way forward because you can do pre-run tests, and with the enhancements in Visual Studio Code, you now get all of these parameters in the splat and being able to use tab completion. So please use splatting where you can if you're using AZ PowerShell and PowerShell in general. And yeah, that link again, docs.microsoft.com, which is now Learn, and this shows how old this deck really was. That it's now learn.microsoft.com, n-gb or n-us, or whatever country code that you want to use, /PowerShell/Azure/Azure PS-VM-tutorial, and that'll take you to the latest version or particular version as that one has put to. The Azure CLI, same thing again. It's in the Docker Hub as well as the Azure PowerShell is. Again, it supports cross OS use as a Python-based CLI. It's less verbose than Azure PowerShell, which is one of the key arguments that I get for using CLI versus Azure PowerShell is the verboseness of Azure PowerShell versus Azure CLI. Developers, and I appreciate this because I'm lazy too, like to be as lazy as possible in how much we type and how much we read. I find that the Azure CLI is a little bit more cryptic and is more irksome to read than Azure PowerShell can be. I find that I'm reading things a lot quicker with Azure PowerShell, but that's because I'm used to writing PowerShell now for 12 years, as opposed to a lot of other programming languages and scripting languages, like Bash, for example, which is, again, for me, more irksome to read. PowerShell really is accessibility friendly. It works very well with accessibility tooling, whereas some of the CLI tooling like Azure CLI isn't as accessibility friendly. It's getting better because there's a big push by Microsoft and via the whole industry in general for better accessibility, but CLI for me is a more get it done and quick type of language, whereas PowerShell can be get it done and just as quick language if you know how to work it and use it as well as people like me do know. So the Azure CLI, this is what it looks like in comparison to Azure PowerShell, but it's exactly the same. In 32 lines of code, we are creating logging into an Azure tenant. We're then creating a new resource group. We're then creating a new virtual machine. We're then showing that virtual machine. We're then querying about it. And we're then creating a second virtual machine, and then creating using the same methods. And then we're just removing that with no waiting this time as opposed to waiting last time. This is just to show the different ways that you could do so. And again, that's all available via the tutorials that are on learn.microsoft.com. So the Cloud Shell. This is an Azure specific shell environment, runs in a container. You can run this locally, or you can just run the container running as it is in Azure. It uses either the Bash or the PowerShell runtimes. You do need a storage account for it, particularly if you want to add your own things like your own PowerShell modules or your own scripts. or your other tools that you may want, but it has a lot of tools that are available. It connects to your Azure tenant and allows you to interact with your resources and allows you to use the CLI or PowerShell. Again, lots of tools in there, and it runs in your web browser too and on the mobile app as well. And you can run it in VS Code and in Terminal as well. And a lot of the docs now have a try and Cloud Shell option, which is, especially if you're looking through the learning paths, they're incredibly important and very useful for you being able to try something in an Azure tenant that is completely isolated away from something that you manage and maintain and importantly pay for yourself, whether that's through free credits or something that you've added a credit or debit card to that allows you to use Azure at whatever level you want, whether that's personally or professionally as part of your business. Docs again on lund@microsoft.com and Cloud Shell overview. The REST APIs, they're useful and usable, but they can be very painful as opposed to using the CLI, PowerShell, or the other SDKs. But there are times where you may need to invoke a REST API yourself, and you can do that with invoke AZ resource action and invoke AZ REST method, I think it is, and AZ REST in the CLI. Now we're coming on to my area, and this is where I think is more important, and this is using templating engines, whether that's the Azure Resource Manager or its version 2, much more improved and less irksome to work with, but sometimes still a little bit irksome to work with in Bicep, but that's just due to it being a new language which is going through constant evolution, whereas ARM is very much static with not as much evolution. The templates are Azure specific deployment templates. With Bicep, we're now seeing things with Project Radius. If I remember correctly, this can now allow you to deploy things to other clouds with using Bicep as your language of choice to do so. You could do this in other languages like AZ PowerShell and generally just in PowerShell, but being able to do this in Bicep, if that's what your team is using, or Terraform, if that's what your team is using, is useful as well. We'll talk about Terraform and other things a little bit later. As I said, Bicep is the evolved version of ARM. ARM is a language built in JSON, whereas Bicep is a completely custom language. Very similar in some ways to bits of ARM, but not so much so that it's as annoying to developers to write as ARM was. Everybody I've spoken to has been much more appreciative of Bicep and its way of writing than ARM. But as somebody that lived through ARM and has the scars to prove from it, I'd very much say that you need to know about ARM, but not spend as much time now as maybe I have over the years, because sometimes you might need to drop down to an ARM template and the bits in the Azure portal for that Bicep compiles down to ARM in doing the deployment, but you might need to troubleshoot the ARM template that Azure's seen as part of the deployment, which isn't the template that you've written in Bicep or Terraform or other tooling. Both of these and all the others allow you for scalable, orchestrated, and most importantly, quite complex deployments of your resources in your tenant and cross tenants, if you use multiple tenants in your environment, and multiple subscriptions and multiple resource groups and multiple management groups, which we'll talk about a little bit more. These give you infrastructure as code, and we'll talk about it a bit more, but you can use a lot of the quick start templates available. There's UI search at azure.microsoft.com, en-us/resources/templates. There's then the repository, which has both ARM and Bicep templates on GitHub, and that's an Azure/Azure quick start templates. Then you've got now registry modules, which are Bicep thing, and now we've also got Azure verified modules, but you've also got Azure Cloud Adoption Framework, and you've got well architected framework as well, and various other Azure specific things. I didn't want to put all of them in here because there's a lot more. You've got VS Code snippets for support via the extension. You can deploy these in complete or incremental mode. Incremental is the right way forward for production environments. complete way forward is the right way for development and deploy and tear down environments. Whereas production, you typically want a forward fix type deployment, not a deploy and overwrite by pulling down an environment and redeploying. Or you may use complete mode and redeploy a production environment and do a cutover deployment to the new production environment. That might be something you might do. It gives you the flexibility to do either of those. As I say, complete is destructive, incremental is not. And both of ARM and Bicep templates technically are infrastructure as code and not really configuration as code. Configuration as code, I like to make the difference between that and infrastructure as code, though typically the industry just uses infrastructure as code to talk about both together. I feel this is wrong because infrastructure as code is talking about your resources and their configuration, but not the configuration of the things within the resources. So an example of that might be an Azure web app, and it might be it runs the Python or PHP runtime, for example, or the .NET runtime, but it's then what's deployed into that web app and the application within it and its configuration, which is configuration as code, not infrastructure as code. And that can be other tooling as well that uses configuration as code, which might be, for example, in PowerShell world, we use desired state configuration, but you may use other tooling like Ansible or Puppet or Chef or various other tools for that as well. This is an ARM template, but Bicep is pretty much the same. You've got the core components of your parameters, you've got your variables, you've got your resources, you've got your outputs, and then you've got language functions. You've also got things like your content version and your schema. If you're using the Azure Resource Manager as opposed to Bicep, you've then got in your resources, you've got API version and the type. These are now slightly different in Bicep to ARM in the fact that you provide these all in one line as opposed to being separate things. And as you can see there, you've got tags and properties to the resources. We'll talk about tags a little bit further on, but these are the important things to use. And when I first wrote this deck, this one screenshot was not in color because the tooling in VS Code didn't have the colorization that it has now, which shows that, again, one of the scars that I have from all the years of writing ARM templates in whether that be Notepad++ or Notepad or in VS Code without having language colorization, which for me as somebody that can see color is very important, but for those of us that are color blind but have the tooling like accessibility tooling that shows that there is difference between those things, the colorization is an important thing to have as part of the language features. So it's an important thing for me, being quite proud of the fact that the languages and the technologies that Microsoft come out with are getting much more accessible over the years than what they have been, and have always got a mindset to keep accessibility in mind, because Microsoft, I'm sure you're aware, more than aware, employ a lot of people, and not all of those people have perfect vision, not all of those people have perfect eyesight, perfect sound, hearing, perfect smell, taste, smell. Some of those people are disabled to various different levels, and having the ability to have tooling that enables them to still continue to work is just as important as enabling people like myself and yourselves the ability to work, because at some point we might need that tooling to help us continue, and I'm happy to see a lot more happening in this area. So parameters come in two flavors. We have interactive use, so this is just using the AZ PowerShell to deploy, so the new AZ deployment. We've then got location. I pass this in on the command line all interactively, but we can use parameter files, so I can pass it a template file with a full file to it that allows me to have that in source code, which is useful for getting somebody, like I said, John in previous part of this, he to review that before it goes out and does the deployment. It's more scalable, maintainable, and you can do testing on it than you can do in doing so in interactive use. But they're both as important, and it is useful to have. Variables, you can have them statically defined like this. So this is a set of variables, and this is an object. So that's MHSLL prod object with sub properties of site name, custom host name, test site name, and these were all ones that I've used previously. They don't exist anymore. They can also be dynamically defined like this, where we've got our variables with the resource group and its name, which is concatenated from the parameters that we've passed in before. So you can see here it's going to be UK South as the name is going to be whatever resource group name we've passed in before with -rg, which some people find they need to use. I personally don't. I think some of the naming conventions, and I've also put this in the Cloud Adoption Framework previously, that some naming conventions can be an anti-pattern, especially if you want something that is highly secure and not as, in my mind, as easily guessed as having a naming convention. But there are some certain things that still require naming conventions due to the platform's limitations. Some of those are like DNS names and storage account names due to how the platform has been built in the past. But using a combo of static or dynamically defined variables gives you some rigid flexibility in how you deploy your resources. And rigid flexibility might sound like a phrase that makes no sense, but it allows you to be rigid about how you deploy things, but allows you to be flexible too, without giving your developers headaches, without giving your ops people headaches, but allows you to put good governance in place, which is important. Your resources, so this is how you define what you're creating in Azure. So this is an example of creating an availability set for a set of virtual machines. And as you can see here, we've got a virtual machine configuration parameter where we've got its name as a property, and then we're using -as. We're then using resource group.location, which is a pattern I will use unless you really want to have a resource group and things sprawled across multiple locations. I tend to find it makes more sense to have resource groups with things in that location deployed, and then we've got the properties as well. All resources have platform-specific API version properties, which may include previews. And if you just give me a second, I'm just going to nip to the toilet, and I'll just be a moment. Apologies for that. Unfortunately, one of the joys of having some physical health issues and some mental health issues as well is my bladder is a bit of a pain in the bum. But yeah, resources are what you're deploying in Azure. I use API versions for this because I like not using the latest API version, but setting the one that I want and having that as part of a variable that I use alongside all of my deployments, so that I can make it much easier to change this and update this as I go ahead. That's an ops thing that I know when I have the conversations with devs, they go, let's just use latest everywhere. Sometimes there are reasons why you might want to not use the latest, like in previous years, there's been some changes to the underlying properties that come through with certain resources. I think at one point compute and virtual machines was one that had that, but there's certainly been times where previews, as they are, they have things that may be changed before it goes into being a GA version that's used and deployed. So just something as again a scar that I've had over the years, and many devs have had over the years as well. Pinning your API versions, I think, is a good practice. When you've got your outputs, so these are useful if you want to output things that you want to use in a sub deployment as part of a larger set of orchestrated deployments. But this is also useful for just having an output that you can then reference as part of the your operation cycle of just ensuring your deployment was as successful as it was. So this is just an example of outputting an object that has various values. You know, I've got a prod DR and a test set of networks here, which is incredibly important and useful if you're creating a large-scale virtual machine infrastructure across multiple resources and multiple regions, which have, as we would normally have, a production and a disaster recovery, as well as a test environment. You may find that you do things differently, not have prod and DR and have a highly available that's split across a set of regions. You can still classify those as prod and DR, but it depends how you want to do that in your environments. And the interesting thing is, if you want to do this, and this is in ARM, but this is very much similar in Bicep, you can reference the deployment name that you've had, and then its outputs, and then the virtual network and its value. And you can go further down. I could do .prod.name or prod.resource group as part of a value for later on in your deployments, which I find incredibly useful in those big complex deployments where you want to optimize the amount of time that you are using for the deployment, as opposed to waiting hours and hours and hours, and if not sometimes days, to deploy a complex set of infrastructure, like say for example an Active Directory domain that has Exchange, SharePoint, lots of SQL servers, lots of additional file servers, and some client machines as well. I can do that in about an hour and a half, as opposed to many days with the right set of configuration and in the templates, the way that the deployments work. Probably even quicker now. Now that Azure's got better its ways of deploying things. But yeah, being able to do that much more quickly allows me to, one, go on and do other things, but two, also get things done much more efficiently. So for me, advanced ARM and Bicep templates, you use conditions, use copy indexing to reduce the amount of code that you're using. I haven't gone into copy indexing, but there's some links to talk about. You're using the template language functions. Use dynamic variables built from your parameters and your parameter files. Using your parameter files and parameters for further modularization, so that you can build not a single template that does everything, but a template that can be used time and time again to do the same thing across multiple different similar deployments of similar types of resources. I always try and use subscription level deployments over resource group level deployments, because that allows you to parallelize out very much more, much further. But you can also do one further up. You can use management group level deployments. You can also do another level up, and that'd be tenant level. But you'd have to do that with multiple different deployments if you're doing tenant level deployments. You can use nested or linked templating to further enable modularized deployments. Bicep, interestingly enough, uses nested templating for its overall deployment, but that's so that it gets one deployment object at once, which is a thing for the platform to be much more performant. But linked templating says do deployment 1 with then deployment 2, deployment 3, deployment 4, but they can all be parallel at the same time, or you can sequence them using depends on, which allows you to orchestrate the deployment ordering. So for example, a deployment ordering, you might need a set of virtual machines, but you can't deploy those virtual machines until you've got the virtual network and the virtual NICs deployed. And you can't get those deployed until you've got the resource group deployed. And you probably can't get the virtual machines deployed until you've also got a key vault deployed that contains the credential that you want to use for that virtual machine. Whether that be something that you deploy as part of the deployment or something that you reference from the deployment. So this allows you, as I say, a much more advanced level of orchestration. So your nested templates look a little bit like this, where you've got a resources within a template that you're deploying, and this uses the type of a resources deployment. This contains everything that you need within it. This then becomes a little bit more painful to go and work through and diagnose, because you're looking at what could be many thousand lines of ARM, or ARM, especially when you are using Bicep and then compiling down to ARM, or ARM if you're just using ARM, which I find is a headache to work through. I much prefer nested, not nested, but linked templates. as I say, they're not my preference. As over the years, they've had many limitations. Most of that have now gone away now with Bicep using them natively. Their link templates, I feel, are more flexible. They allow more opportunity for you to parallelize your deployment, and most importantly, split up a big, large template into more sizable, easy to manage and maintain chunks, which is what we want, I think, generally. It does require ARM to be accessible, but link templates can also use a template spec as well, which is something I haven't put in this, but I should have done. They can be public GitHub with no security, which is fine for templates, or you can using my preferred method, which is using an Azure storage account secured with a SAS token. This again has changed. I prefer to use template specs, but the things have changed a lot over the years. An example of a link template resource. This is why it makes it much easier. So this is using a URI of something that is stored in a storage account, which is a storage account which is actually fully publicly accessible. This one, and then your parameters link is just a parameters file, which is also in that one. So we've not had to provide a SAS token, but if you did need to, you would apply it at the end of the resource URI after the .json there, which is easy to do. So securing them, integrate the creation or reading of key vault secrets within the deployment. You can also use managed identities, whether that be a system managed identity or a user managed identity. You may even use a reference to a user managed identity that is contained within a key vault, and referencing the key vault to access that. Something that I've seen used out there in production environments. Again, use the reference keywords. You can statically define them like this. So this is an example of using resource ID of security for the resource group, the key vault for the key vault type, and then the actual key vault name, and then the secret name. Again, this doesn't exist, so I don't mind sharing this, and even when it did exist, I didn't mind sharing it either. And then this can be dynamically defined, so we're concatenating the parameters of the key vault name and the VM secret name, and getting the value from that there. But that does need key vault already set up, which could be previously done or done as part of your deployment within this template or another previously run template. You can also use it in this way, where you do a reference to the output of a key vault ID and then the key vault's value, and then you can use the secret name from the variable. You could also have that as an output from a previous deployment that had the VM secret name. So why do I think ARM and Bicep templates? Scalable, repeatable, and getting better at being easy to maintain, especially with people now learning more about them. You can wire in the templates into what was Dev Test Labs. I don't know what they've changed the name to, but that was something that allowed you to set an environment that you can deploy, which allowed you a very nice, easy UI for deploying a set of different environments, which could be used ARM templates. It could use other things as well. So they allowed you to predefine and share those environments around your teams. I'm not recalling off the top of my head what Dev Test Labs has been rebranded to, but it's by the same team. I think it might be Lab Services or Lab Environment, something like that. And for me, built right, ARM and Bicep templates, or Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI, when you build these things right, they're so much more flexible, so much more powerful than what you can get over your own custom set of PowerShell and CLI deployments. When I did one of my engagements many years ago, I was working with a company that was working with Staffordshire University. Staffordshire University was one of the first universities to really embrace Azure and do a big mass migration of stuff to Azure from their own data centers. That was when ARM templates were just coming out, but Azure PowerShell was a big thing, and they had a deployment pipeline that was in and built using Azure PowerShell. I spent some time outside of that engagement in my own time, having a look into ARM templates, having a look into how module they were and how they were allowing much easier parallelization within the language natively than AZ PowerShell at the time was. Though knowing with Azure, my PowerShell knowledge at that time, I knew how I could build something in PowerShell that would allow me to parallelize in the same way that ARM would, but I knew that doing so in ARM would be something that would be much more beneficial than trying to build that mechanism in AZ PowerShell and PowerShell. So I lean towards using ARM and the platform tools as opposed to your own tooling, just because it's much easier and you get the benefit of many people like me and others using those tools that are saying, we need this, we need that, can you do this, can you do that, can you get this in this month please, because I really need it and this is why. And you will see, like with Bicep and ARM templates, there's been a lot of very vocal people over the years and still very vocal people making those things better. And they have community meetups like this as well. And the last thing, no service can, I have this from the ARM team themselves, can go GA without ARM or Bicep templating available, or at least the REST APIs that are built on top of the ARM builds on top of those. So you can't get a service in GA without those layers being available. You'll get them in public preview and private preview without them, but they tend to try and build them for GA with all of those things available. Don't like going post GA without templating engine being available for them, because they've been shouted at for that happening in the past. And it's what you want for a GA service, to be able to use all of the platform native tooling as opposed to the third-party tooling available for those. So again, subscription level, I won't read through all this because you can read probably just as quickly as I can talk it through, but parallelization allows to orchestrate multiple deployments within a singular deployment, allows you to deploy across multiple resource groups and regions and do that in parallel, and different types again further in parallel. You're not contained to a single region. Massive reduction in your resource deployment times, especially when you architect and orchestrate your deployment properly. You can deploy production test, DR, dev test. You can do user acceptance testing. You can do other environments all at the same time, and just let them go ahead, as long as they're all easily containable as a single deployment template or set of templates. A lot more reading there, and things probably I'll add into this in future, like intro to copy indexing, which I didn't speak about, but allows you to, as I said, basically deploy a lot of things without writing the same code multiple times, and just say do 1 to 10 of these things, which might be important if you've got data disks, virtual machines, virtual NICs, so on and so forth. So the alternatives you've got to ARM and Bicep, you've got Terraform, which uses HCL, HashiCorp configuration language. You've got Pulumi, you've got Farmer, you've got more coming. So I'll talk about PowerShell desired state configuration, and it's now being just called desired state configuration. There'll be a way of deploying Azure resources using DSC in future. I am 100% certain of that. Even though it may not be there yet, it is something that I know people want. So it will be something that I can see happening. Farmer is an F# version. There is also C# versions, so you can write your code in whatever language you want, whereas Pulumi allows you to bring a language of your choice. So you can use JavaScript, you can use TypeScript, you can use C#, you can use other languages within that. And Pulumi is one of the third parties that have been around for a long time, and they do very interesting things. So have a look at that if you haven't ever. Have a look at Terraform if you haven't, whether you use the Azure native Terraform modules or one of the ones that are built by the community, but there's a lot more work that have been done with Terraform over the years as well. So resources, these are all the things that you need in your Azure. You've got your resource hierarchy. So at the top level, you've got your tenant. Within your tenant, you optionally have your management groups. You then have subscriptions, and everything has to be contained within a subscription. You can't get around that anymore. Azure Service Manager, everything had everything in resource groups, but no subscription. Sorry, it didn't have resource groups. It was all within subscriptions. It just had resources and subscriptions. And then you've got all your different levels of resource groups, and you can have in single resource groups or multiple resource groups, and then you've got all your resources and then sub-resources within those. So sub-resource would be like, for example, a virtual network is a resource, but a sub-resource is a subnet, a sub-resource that you can use in your virtual network as well. And it does make sense to logically contain all types of resources or life cycle together. So if you've got an application, you may put everything in a subscription for that application and then split out the different things into sub-resource groups. You may say, for example, you've got security things that go in a security resource group. You've got logging that goes in a logging resource group. You may want to give different permissions to those two different resource groups. When you're in production environments, so your security team, your operations and management and monitoring teams may have access to those without giving your developers access to either, but you may then be able to want to give your developers access if you're troubleshooting an in-production incident. So resource providers, we've covered these a little bit before, so these numbers are old, so I'm going to say there's probably closer to 300 available providers now, mostly from Microsoft, but there are some third-party ones. So the core ones are Microsoft.compute, Microsoft.network, and Microsoft.SQL, and various others. You can deregister in your subscription a resource provider. However, as part of the way that Azure is built, if a person has contribute access, which allows them to deploy resources, you then automatically register those providers. However, if you have an Azure policy, you can deny people from ever being able to register those providers. This is incredibly useful for a production environment where you have already stated maybe you're using AKS, for example, but you don't want somebody to be able to do and deploy an Azure web app, or you don't want them to deploy an Azure SQL, you don't want them to deploy a virtual machine. So by using Azure policy in your subscription or your resource group or your management group layer, that allows you to enforce what can and cannot be deployed in those areas, which you need to do using policy, because policy is the only way you can do that. So tags, these are key value pairing. Very useful to tag resources, say for a particular business unit, or for time limited deployments, say for demos. You could put a delete on date as a tag, and then have an Azure function or an Azure runbook, or some other sort of automation running somewhere that's looking through your environment that will just go and delete them automatically for you. Again, cost management from that. Very underutilized in my time as a consultant, but incredibly powerful. And for example, tag all projects with all resources with a project, say a demo, like in this case it would be Welsh Azure group demo, and that allowed me to delete them after. Azure resource locks, so you can use these as blueprints, and I'll talk about blueprints a little bit later, even though they're deprecated. You can use them at subscription level, resource group and resource level, and they're important because you can define them as read only or delete. So this stops people from making changes who shouldn't be able to make changes. Like if you give them access to the portal, again, read only access is preferable, not read write, and delete access so you don't accidentally delete that resource group in production. It's the single most unused thing in Azure in my experience, along with tags. I give them a joint one along with also Azure policy, being the things that are unused the most. And please at least put delete logs on your production resources. The amount of times I've seen a developer who thinks they're deleting something in their dev tenant, accidentally connected production, but the resource group name is the same, the resource name is the same, and they've gone and deleted production accidentally, and then got a stern telling off by the IT team that production is down, and it's because a developer has made a human error, which we can all make. please don't have that happen in your environments. Put delete locks on. You can remove delete locks as part of your resource deployment. You can put them on as part of your deployment. Very easy to do. Talked about this a little bit. Functions and automation runbooks. So this can be written to enforce things like your shutdown, out of hours, start up at the beginning of the day, scaling up and scaling out of resources, or for doing deletions of things that shouldn't be there, or by doing other management reporting that you may want as well. So management groups, these allow you to group subscriptions based on the place of the organization. You have multiple different layers. You can set role-based access control and policies at management group levels, which simplifies your management massively because they inherit from the top level all the way down. This is the slide, and I should have spent a little bit more time on this slide, but this is how they look. So you've got the top level of the tenant. One second. You've got the top level of the tenant. You've got your root management group, and then you've got your divisional root management groups. You may then have sub-orgs within those divisions. You may have service groups or other grouping types, and then services that you use, and then subscriptions. So it allows you a lot of layering to it. If I remember rightly, there's only 6 levels that you can use with management groups, unless that's changed. I know that when I spoke to the governance team, I asked for that to be 10 or more. I'm not sure if that's changed or not. Role-based access control, they have at least well over 200 built-in RBAC groups. Owner, contributor, and reader being the most commonly used ones, though you can split these to resource-specific owner, resource-specific contributor, and resource-specific reader, which is what you should use realistically. But you've got more fine-grained ones, as I was saying there. Plus, you can also create your own custom ones. I'm not sure if this 5,000 limit is the same, and I'm not sure if the 6,000 provider actions is the same. It's probably a lot more now. 5,000 maybe may have changed. That might be further. I'm not sure if that's changed or not. Azure policy, as I've said, this allows you to set organizational policies within code that runs at your deployment time to check for compliance. So if your Azure policy is set that you are, say, for example, unable to deploy any resources outside the UK, if your resource group is to deploy to Azure region of, say, West US or even West Europe or North Europe, your deployment would fail and it would not allow you to go forward because it's not passed the policy at deployment runtime. If it passes, the deployment can commence, and the deployment can potentially still fail, depending on other things within its deployment. But typically you want it to try and be a case of you have your policy, it passes the policy, it deploys, it tests whether the deployment has been successful, and then you use the services that you've deployed. Examples, I said, allowed locations, allowed virtual machine sizes. I use M128 for the lols as a very pricey virtual machine type that has been around for a long time. I have seen a lot of organizations that have an internal development policy that M128s can't be used in development, but aren't able to be allowed to be used in production because of, for example, they're used on a SQL server, and a particular query that needs to be done once a month actually needs to be run on a much larger machine than is in production at the time. What you could do as part of your policy for this is you could say, have an Azure policy that says you're not allowed an M128. You then deploy a new version of that policy that says you are allowed that 128 for a brief period of time. You then scale up those virtual machines to that M128 as you need, run whatever report or whatever it is that the size up and the scale up of that virtual machine requires, and then downscale the virtual machine size, and then redeploy the policy that says no M128s for the lols. And this allows other things to be done, like your monitor agents and other things to be as part of your deployments as well. Again, you can scope these to management groups, subscription, or resource groups. Cost management is the most important thing for most organizations who come to this at the point where they've got an Azure tenant that they've had for many years and then go, why are we spending so much? Oh, it's because we've not put governance around our cost management. This allows you to review your spend at your management groups, your subscription and your resource group levels, and your resource levels as well. You can find what your resource type is costing you the most in your environment and across your environment. You can find out what region you're spending the most money in. You can find out what resource group and resources are. You need to set budgets and alerts, control budgets with configurable alerts, whether that goes to your dev team, your production team, your dev and production team, your finance team who will shout at you when you're spending too much, whether that goes to your CEO, CFO, or whoever it is that needs to have these alerts. You want them. You can stop teams accidentally overspending with these by having daily alerts, weekly alerts, monthly alerts at set levels, using percentage levels or particular amounts. You can also make use of reserved instances and hybrid benefit. These allow you to lower costs for not just virtual machines but other types as well than the base list price. You can reserve these for if it's changed for 1 or 3 years, but you can sell those reserved instances back and the hybrid benefit back if you don't use them. You can pay for these all at once or monthly, which gives you operational expenditure and capital expenditure mechanisms, which is the benefit of having that is the flexibility to use both. These allow you, with hybrid benefit, to bring your Windows, SQL, BizTalk, and other licenses across using your existing enterprise agreements or Microsoft customer agreements, as it might be now. And combined can reduce the cost by anywhere up to 70%. So just take that in a second. Anywhere up to 70%. Your business will be happy that you've managed to save up to that amount if you do it right. Blueprints have been deprecated, but they are useful to know about because they've got lots of things like your role policy assignments, resource manager templates, and resource groups. They've got overlap, but they can contain your own templates and they can also be used elsewhere. The ability to deny access to resources has now changed. That is now available after a lot of time with the Azure Resource Manager team and people asking for that, like myself. That is now available. So forgive me for the slide not being updated. They have this special locking mechanism which is separated the locks, which has now been pulled into locks as well. They also have some blueprints which has been moved into things like the Cloud Adoption Framework and the well-architected framework for standards like ISO 27001 compliance and NHS compliant designs. You'll see more of that in well-architected framework and the Cloud Adoption Framework than you will do now in blueprints, but they came from blueprints into those areas. Which nicely brings me on to CAF, WAF, and AVM. So Cloud Adoption Framework is the CAF. You've got the well-architected framework, which is the WAF, and then you've got AVM, which is Azure Verified Modules, which is building on both of those as well. There are other ones as well out there. I can't remember them all because there's been so many of them over the years, but these are the three main ones I see being used or will be used. You've then got Security Center, which will give you your security alerts. There's free and standard tiers. On standard tier, you get suggestions to common issues like this. This was an old one, but a faulty SQL statement allowed for a potential SQL injection. This was an alert that I got when I was injecting data into SQL database, Azure SQL database, using a non-parameterized SQL queries, and by just changing to parameterized query, that got rid of that alert completely. Azure Monitor, and this is a centralized area for types of logging and telemetry, but you've got also log analytics. You've also got Sentinel, which you can use with those. You've got various others as well. Application insights as well. These are key ones. Lots of flexibility, lots of alerts and metrics. You've then got Azure Sentinel. It's your cloud native security information event management and security orchestrated automated response solution, which is a huge mouthful for saying this is a way of making your cloud environment more secure and having the information you need to either automatically or manually remediate those problems in your environment. There's a lot that you need to do if you want a secure environment, and Azure Sentinel is just one part of the pieces of the puzzle. So operations planning. So define who has access, secure setup, and this shows how old it is. It's not Azure AD, it's now Entra ID security groups for role-based access control. Define who does what and when, who checks Security Center, who's checking your logs, who's tweaking your alerts. Have that something that you come back to on a frequent basis. Change your operations playbook, if you will, and who does what and when. As your team evolves and more people come into the team, people leave the team, change roles within the team, leave the organization, so on and so forth. Set up your break class accounts, set up MFA. Please use MFA. And if you haven't already, Microsoft will probably have forced you to do so by now. Integrate with your email and IM tools, whether that be Slack, whether it be Teams, whether that be Discord. Send these via webhooks to those toolings so that you can have a lot of integration and real-time access and management. Some people still use their inbox as part of their task management. You could do so. You could use this with other tooling like Microsoft Planner. You could use this with Azure Dev, Azure Boards, or GitHub projects, with GitHub issues. There's lots of different ways to do this. There's no one right way of doing it. There's just have a way of doing it, and tweak it so you find what's right for you and your teams. And discourage ad hoc portal changes and make changes via code that's contributed to a Git repository or TFS repository, source control of some type that other people have visibility of, and can, most importantly, say, oh, Ryan, you've made a spelling mistake. Go and change that before you push this to production or to dev and test, please. Those sort of things. Part 2 of planning, set up your monitoring. Review your access periodically. I like to say quarterly or monthly, depending on how frequently you really need to. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. It could just be 10 minutes to say, are we happy with our access that we have? Do we need to make changes? If so, what are those changes and who's making those changes? Review your resource sprawl, especially in big tenants that have been there forever, and do that over time to reduce costs, but most importantly, reduce your potential for getting breached. Use your Azure policies, enforce the use of tags, again, which can be deployed using Azure policy, and set life cycle as a tag. Does this have a 2-week life cycle? Does this have a month life cycle? Does this have a 6-month life cycle? Does this have a permanent life cycle? Is it something that should never be deleted? It's a good time box development tag. And then set up your functions, runbooks, other automation to look at these and do that for removing them when needed. Again, further governance planning, plan out your governance requirements, turn them into policies, live locations, VM sizes, agents, so on and so forth. Use naming conventions as part of an Azure policy if you want. If you don't want to, that's up to you. Set up your management groups, apply policies to your groups, apply RBAC as part of policies to your groups, investigate blueprints and CAF and WAF and AVM. And then for your development planning, just move away from portal-based development and deployment into production and into dev and test, please. Don't right-click deploy into production. Friends don't let friends right-click deploy to production. Invest time to build out sets of reusable templates of your own, but investigate the ones that are already available via the Azure Quick Start templates, the Bicep repository that's out there, and now AVM, which is going to basically be the subset of all of those that consumes all of them, and CAF and WAF as well. Integrate your testing as part of your build and release pipelines, whether that is something that you do as a local build pipeline and a local release pipeline, or something that is done orchestrated using whether that be Azure DevOps pipelines, GitHub pipelines, and GitHub Actions, or other automated tooling that is something that you use in your team, whether that be something like Jenkins or other build and release toolings. Set up review groups for all of these different stages, have regular meetings. Don't spend a lot of time in those meetings, but just have actionable things in each meeting that needs to happen or be done prior to the meeting to make it quick and easy. Train your ops on dev practices, but train your dev teams on your ops practices as well. Get them to sit together and work together. Particularly in my world, I would say use dev practices, use Git for your source control, use ARM and Bicep templates where applicable, and where possible, you make use of PowerShell or other scripting technologies and their set of ecosystems and tools within them to make your time and doing your job much more efficient, much more fun, and much more enjoyable than clicking around in lots of GUIs that you need to learn and can't share those clicks very easily. Which is why we use scripting technologies, because you can share a script, you can get somebody to review a script, you can share a deployment mechanism and workbook that is a set of tasks that you need to do that may use the GUI for point and click, but you find that the time spent writing that is probably more beneficial writing the script to do the same thing, as opposed to a workbook that is a set of changes that may change over time with the UIs changing. Azure DevOps is a good solution, but there are other out there. Key takeaways: Azure is a big platform, easy to mismanage, easy to misconfigure. Both can lead to you being breached, but use your platform tools to make it a breeze. No major headaches to manage and maintain. And if you've got any feedback, you can use that link to provide feedback, or share that, scan that QR code, and that will go to an Azure Microsoft form. You can provide me feedback, or if you want, you can provide feedback in this. I am just going to nip very quickly to the toilet, so give me just a second and we'll carry on from there. Okay, has anybody got any questions or any feedback you want to share at all?
The questions have been coming in the chat, I think, as we've been going, to be honest, Brian.
Yeah, I'll go and have a look in the chat, because obviously we're sharing, only having one screen at the moment.
Yeah, I think we've been kind of answering amongst ourselves. I don't know if there's anything stand out in there. Have a quick scan back through now. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it, I think. That was awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much for talking us through that. It's like you say, from an operational point of view, there's so much to go into it there from an Azure platform perspective. So I think you managed to nail all that down pretty well then.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned being a consultant that's gone into many different organizations of different scales and sizes and in different industries is that there's a lot of things that people have done over the years with getting into Azure. Like, some of the projects that I've seen getting into Azure have been very rushed. Like, we need to get something in Azure and we need to get it in yesterday. They haven't taken the time to think, how do we need to then manage what's in Azure once they've got it in there? And then they do another project 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line, when somebody in finance goes, why are we spending, 5 million a year in this? And we don't really have the budget for it. What's gone wrong? What can we do to change that? Sure. One of the things that I've say this to every organization and anybody that I speak to about these things is, the more time that you spend up front planning things like your deployment into Azure and how you're going to do your operational governance and making sure that you get your policies, who's doing what, where, when, and why. Most importantly, you get that done up front. you don't then need to spend as much time getting costly consultants like myself when I've been doing consultancy work to come in and basically do a review for you and provide you with, here's what you need to do in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 years, 5 years to get you to where you want to be. Not saying that that's not good, because, getting somebody like myself who's gone in and done this and isn't in your environment and is external to you as an organization gives you validation, and gives quite a lot of the time, actually, I find developers and operations team additional validation that they've been talking the right talk, and that they needed their teams, particularly their C-level executives, to not just go with what they're saying, but give them the funding to do what they're asking a lot of the time. Sometimes, though, there are things that, because of the scale and the change in Azure, if you're in a day-to-day operations team, you're looking after a product and a service in your production environments and your dev and test environments, along with your dev teams. You might not have the time to keep abreast of all the changes that are happening that are going to be impacting to you. And the changes happening not just daily, but hourly. A lot of the products that you see in Azure have deployments that happen behind the scenes many times a day. We're not talking like as it used to be many years ago, where you'd get, and as we still see with, services like Windows Server, for example. We've now got insider builds of Windows Server, like we've had with Windows Client, where you get insider builds. I get them on a weekly basis, but you can get feature updates on a 6-monthly basis if you want to go slower, or you can wait even longer and have a full update when the next big version comes out, like going from Windows 10 to Windows 11, or Windows 10, 1709 all the way to like 2022-02, for example. It depends on what you need to do and when you want to take these big changes in, which again is part of your operational governance and planning. But there's a lot out there that's changing. That's the one thing that I'm going to say is going to be the thing that you're going to see change even more now, with tooling like GitHub Copilot, Copilot in general, the 120,000+ variations of Copilot that we have across the Microsoft technologies now. I say that as a silly number, but that's the true of it, is there are just so many Copilots for all the different technologies. It's hard to keep abreast of the benefits that they'll give you, but they are incredibly important to make use of, and sometimes discard what they tell you. Take it with a pinch of salt, like you would do what somebody else, like a consultant like myself, will tell you. There'll be things I'll say that you need to do as part of your environment that you might go, yeah, that's not going to work here, or it's not going to fly here because of X, Y, Z internal politics reason. Which is one of the things I've found over the years is one of the slow things for organizations going forward. But I hope that's been useful. I hope it's not taken too much of your time to learn from the things I've seen over the years, and I hope that's giving you a lot of food for thought, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. No, absolutely. If everybody wants to show their respect and use the react buttons. I'll come off mute and thank Ryan for his time. That was brilliant. Do stick around now, Ryan, and take part in our I don't know what the word is, infamous quiz, I guess you could call it. We'll jump straight on over now. Let me share my screen. So for those of you that are fairly regular, we're going to use our Quizzer platform. So yeah, well, look, we've got 4 prizes up for grabs. There's a good chance that somebody's going to win something. We've got a couple of Amazon vouchers, and we've actually got those ebooks that we say Packet have stepped in and offered us some links for some ebooks tonight. So if I head on over to the quiz platform page, which is here, you can click on the play button, and if you've got your mobile phone, look at that, and he says you can click on the play button. There we go. So there should be, that's running a little bit slow. I have to have a chat with Mr. Fatunker about that. There we go, if he's listening in. Scan the QR code or jump on over to quizzer.co.uk and type in that code. Hopefully put yourself a little name in there, like give yourself a name. There we go. And yeah, Ross, I just saw you were in the chat. Long time no see, sir. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for coming back. No prizes for guessing who's going to win the quiz tonight. Good little emoticon there for Ross. I'll give it a couple of minutes now. Copilot, love it. So yeah, Matt actually added some generative AI into this quiz platform. By the way, this quiz platform is like, it's a bit of a copy of Kahoot, but if you've not seen it before, it was written by our own Matt Fatunka, so it's open source. I think Matt is Memleak on GitHub. If you find him, you can find this platform and deploy it into your own Azure environment, I believe, or at least raise some issues. How many we got there? 1, 2, 3, 8 people. Does say there 9 people, 10 people. Good. Just want to see how many folks there are in the chat. So 16. I'm 1. So there's 15. Give us a nudge or come off mute if you're stuck or got a problem. We'll hang fire for a bit longer. You're trying to get in. I sound like an auctioneer, don't I? Speaking to myself. People can interact with me if they want to. I don't mind. Come on, Alan. You normally rebooting your browser window or something like that at this stage. In fact, I don't see you on there. Is Alan still on?
No, I'm there, John.
Where are you? Where are you? Who are you?
Mr. Copilot.
Oh, that's you, is it? Very good, very good. So, is everybody okay? Is anybody struggling? Please speak now or forever hold your peace.
Nicholas has said he's had some issues.
Is he? Right, okay. I can see he's there, Nick 1. Is that you, Nicholas?
No, I've had issues in the past, but I've logged on twice. I'll only use one, but it didn't work out for me last time. So it's like once bitten, twice shy.
Got you. So you're in. So are we waiting for anybody? My calculation.
Let's see if the quiz starts when I'm in.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, we'll give it a go then. Shout up now if anybody's stuck. Otherwise, we're going to hit start. I think we've got 10 questions. Remember, it's the fastest finger first, so you get more points the faster you are with the correct answer. We've got 4 prizes, so good odds of winning. At the end, if you win, I'm going to need your full name and your email address. We'll do that at the end, but make sure you're ready to drop that in a chat for me so I can get the prizes sorted. Here we go. We're all ready then. Everybody okay? Which of the following is not supported deployment type in Azure Draft? I know Rolf has had to drop off, but he'd be impressed the fact that we've got some draft-related questions in here.
No.
So the answer is Terraform, B. So a bit of a 50-50 split on that one. Next up, which Azure Draft command adds a Docker file and deployment template to your application? I think if you were paying attention earlier on to Rolf's talk, you might have caught it very briefly on the chat there, on the terminal. Draft create, there we go. Again, a bit of 50-50 split there, but doing well. Next up, what is the name of the new default font in Microsoft Word? This is interesting, actually, because I was adjusting it earlier on today, thinking, where did that come from? But surprisingly, I know this one. Aptos, it is. Aptos. Funny enough, spotted that today myself, so really prompt question, that one, I think. What is the name of the OpenAI service used for creating short videos from prompts? Is it Nora, Sora, Koala, or Kiora? If you haven't tried it out, it's worth having a play because it's quite impressive. Sora. Again, we're splitting the pack here every question, which is good. Which Azure management tool analyzes resources and provides recommendations to optimize deployments?
Something that I stupidly didn't put in.
There we go. See, Matt's pretty good with his questions. He tries to angle them with the talk. So there we go. Most of us knew that one. Azure Advisor it is. Your pocket consultant. Which of the following is not an Azure policy effect? Audit if not exists, deploy if not exists, ignore or deny. Which one is not a policy effect? Yes, most of us got that one as ignore. Very, very good. We're not far away now. So what does CAT stand for? I think you mentioned this in your talk, Ryan.
Yep. Definitely cats and fish.
Cats and fish. And there we go. We all got that one. Cloud Adoption Framework it is. How many AKS clusters are allowed per subscription by default? Is it 1,000, 100, 5,000, or 10,000? How many AKS clusters are allowed per subscription by default? And the answer is 5,000. B. Yeah, a bit of a mixed split again on that one. Where are we now? Right, which of the following can I use to secure network traffic in an AKS cluster? Helm, Calico. I don't know how you pronounce that. Is it at CD? No, I'll go CD. Calico is the correct answer. And so there we go. Which of one of these Xbox games was announced for PlayStation 5 recently? Gears of War 5, Redfall, Sea of Thieves, or Halo Infinite? Always got to get an Xbox game in there, Matt. Keep us on our toes. Sea of Thieves. Seen it played, never played it myself. There we go. So we have the winning order of Brad Wills is first. Ross, there we go. You're up there somewhere, matey. James W. and Simon. So can you do before those top 4 players? Can you all either, if you follow me on Twitter or if we're connected on LinkedIn, drop it over there. Happy to. Or if you don't mind sharing it in the chat, you don't mind others seeing the details, then please do drop your name with your email address. And just put your position on there. I'll take a snip of this now, actually, because my mind isn't as good as it used to be. God, my snipping tool clue doesn't work. But yeah, if you don't mind dropping. Oh, hello. Wow, snipping tool. Give me a hard time. If you don't mind just dropping that in the chat, that would be super duper. Congratulations to all the winners there. So Brad and Ross, you can have a £25 voucher. James W, you've got Containers for Developers packet ebook link coming over to you. And Simon, I believe you've got IoT handbook from Packet Publishers, and they're ebooks, by the way. So you'll get a link in a couple of days. And Ross and Brad, you'll get your voucher in a few days as soon as I got it sorted for you.
Lovely.
There you go.
Just as a very quick one there, John, to get your snipping tool up and quickly, Windows Shift and S.
Oh, you're going to tell me, here we go. I'm going to lose that now, and I. Windows Shift and S, God. Do you remember that one? I'm just trying to look at it now. Okay, so it's like the save, but without, yeah, okay. I'll remember that one. Good tip. Right, there we go. There's your prizes. Let's bring this one to a close then. So, right, firstly, let me say my thanks to the team. So, yeah, huge thanks to Rolf and Ryan. You know, really appreciate, folks coming onto these user group sessions and, just giving up the time really just to kind of impart their knowledge, impart their thoughts and ideas and opinions so that we can all kind of learn from them. So, Ryan, Rolf, huge thanks and appreciation for you to join. Likewise, everybody that has joined, we can't, it's not the same without you guys coming on and, learning, taking part in the quiz at the end, being interactive in the chat. Really do appreciate it. So huge thanks for everybody that's involved for this month's efforts. Quiz prizes are on their way to those folks that have just won. And final parting comments, the next event will be on the 17th of April. We've got another 2 compelling speakers, just getting that finalised over the next day or two. So it'll be up on the meetup. If you don't mind providing a little bit of feedback, the feedback form is there on the QR code or that link. Really appreciate any feedback you got. But for now, huge thanks to everybody for joining. And yeah, we will hopefully see you all next month.
And just as a final parting one from myself, as one of the organisers for PowerShell UK user groups, we do have some meetups. We will be, now I've moved into my new house, we'll be setting up some of those again in the next couple of months. You can follow me on Twitter, Ryan Yates 1990, or look at PowerShell.org.uk, where I'll start to release these all out. We do use Meetup. We've got PowerShell London user group, which is the core one. We may be moving away from Meetup just as a platform for other things that are out there, just as a test the waters of some other platforms. But yeah, more will be announced in the next couple of months on those, potentially with in-person meetups returning in different parts of the country. So like Alan, for example, who I know is up at Manchester because I used to work with him at UM, University of Manchester. He'll be happy to hear that we might do an in-person meetup in Manchester at some point soon.
Good work. Yeah, good shout out. So yeah, go and join in the fun, everybody. So, and help us grow the community. Like I say, help share these things when you see them. It means a lot if you can share them across your networks on LinkedIn or Twitter, whether it's the Welsh Azure user group or any local user group for that matter. Helps get the awareness up and more folks can join and take part. But
sharing is caring, as we all say.
Absolutely. So no, but yeah, thanks for that, Ryan. Perfect.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Not at all. Anytime. So yeah, thank you all. I'm going to go and grab a bit of tea and sort the kids out and see what's on the telly now for an hour. Thanks all. See you all soon then.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your days.
Cheers all.
Cheers. Harry Potter given the last few nights, John, if you need something for the kids.
Right, catch you all soon.